When we're talking about managing salespeople, again, if you manage the activities, the performance tends to happen, or the results tend to happen. From my experience, the number one reason, well, there's actually two reasons why sales reps don't hit quota. Number one, they're just not doing anywhere near the level of activity that they need. Number one. That's by far number one. They're not making enough calls. They're not prospecting. They're calling follow-ups. They get caught up in the follow-up loop, right? So they're either not doing sufficient activity. That's the number one, by far. But number two would be they're not following the process. So they're not qualifying properly. They're not asking good diagnostic questions. You know, Jordan Belfort's going to be here on Friday. And one thing I really like about Jordan's process, he calls it the straight line. And what I love about that is it's a very good visual of what the sales process should be like. You start here and you're going to end in a close. That's the goal. That's the path. And as you're talking to a prospect, the prospect's always trying to pull you off the path, right? Or you go wander off the path and get eaten by a bear. That's what I tell my reps when I'm listening to their calls. I'm like, why the hell did you start talking about, you know, your weekend run on the trail like that? What does that got to do with closing the sale? Well, he said he liked to run, so I was trying to build rapport or what. No. You were here and you were headed towards a close, and then you wandered off the trail and you got eaten by a bear. You might wander off a little bit, but get back on the trail. They pull you over here with an objection, you get back on the trail. So I do like that as a visual. And so again, two things is activity and they're not following the process. And I changed this. So if you go back a couple of years, you'll see something very similar, but I've recently kind of changed my thinking, not radically, like it's, you know, gravity is still gravity, but just in the way I'm going to talk about it. And there's three metrics that you want to look at and measure and manage by, right? So one is sales results. Now, sales results are how much new MRR did you close from new customers? Or how much new MRR did you close from existing customers? How much money was collected? How many projects did you sell? That's how, like for an SDR, sales development rep, an appointment setter, how many appointments set this week, this quarter, this month, whatever it is, right? Those are sales results, okay? The second metric I look at is pipeline performance. And pipeline performance is how they process inbound leads, calls, etc. So, for example, if they called 100 prospects and they made the 3 to 5 dial, like they prospected 100 people, what percentage of people did they actually get to pitch the decision maker? Like how many times did they actually get to talk to the decision maker, okay? And when they got to the decision maker, if they got to 10 decision makers and they got their opening pitch out, how many appointments did they book off of that? So those are performance metrics. On my sales team, I want to know how many, if they got an at-bat, meaning they sat in an appointment with a prospect, what is their closing percentage on the call, close on consult percentage, and what's their close overall? So they might talk to somebody and it closes next week, right? And I look at close rate. Now, you could say, well, what the hell difference does it make as long as they're hitting quota? Well, it matters a lot. So if I have one rep who, when I put them on a consult, will close 60%, and the average sale is, you know, let's say it's like they're selling them accelerators, which is $2,000 a month, right? They're closing at 60%, $2,000 on a 24-month, right? So we're making good money on that rep. But I have another rep over here, and his close rate's 30%, and he's only selling the toolkit for $300 a month. You see, the reason I care about performance metrics is if I have good leads that are costing me $400, $350, $400 to get that appointment to sit, and you got one guy who has a 60% chance of closing it, the other guy's 30. This guy's going to sell a sale that is it's going to be a, $68,000 contract versus this guy that's going to close one that's going to be worth $2,000. Who do you want to give that lead to? You see what I mean? So now this guy who's not closing as many might say, well, I'm going to still hit quota because I'm going to call more, I'm going to do extra prospecting, and this guy might not do, maybe he's hitting quota, you don't care. Now, we look at both. If they're hitting quota, I'm not firing them, because if they're hitting quota, that's fine. But we are still always trying to coach them in order to get performance up, because we want to make sure that we're getting the maximum for our marketing spend. Because the marketing spend to get that phone to ring and get that prospect to raise their hand has already been spent, and the performance now is how is that lead being handled and followed up with and closed, and we got to make sure we're getting the maximum performance out of that. So that's pipeline performance. The same with an SDR. So let's say if I have one SDR that out of every 100 unique prospects that we give her to call, she books 5 appointments. And there's a rep over here, and I need to give him 300 to call to book one appointment. The problem is we do mailings in advance. So I've got to do 3 times the spend with this guy than I've got to spend on this rep. And that's why you want to look at pipeline performance, because you're always trying to manage to, let's get your performance up to a certain level. And what you'll find is some reps are good in some areas, like they're really great at getting to the decision maker and booking the appointment, but they're really crappy at something else, right? So we have some SDRs that are really good at the blog clicks. So when somebody goes to our blog, or like a virtual visitor, prospect detective kind of visitor, someone comes to the website, they haven't opted in. I have some SDRs that are really good. They jump on those. They're great at, converting those to appointments. I have some that can't make those work at all. But they're really good over here on getting people into seminars or webinars, right? So you're going to find different people have different performance metrics based on who they're calling, what the situation is, all right? And then the third thing that you're going to measure are sales activities, and those are things like dials made, the number of outreaches. So you can see I have down here, like dials made, digital outreach, follow-up activities, networking events and trade shows attended. If you have an outside sales rep, they might be going to networking events. That's part of it. Canvassing might be part of it. And the thing, again, that you want to look at are all 3 of these. Sales results, which is quota. Pipeline performance is how do they perform with the leads and the opportunities and the lists that you give them. And then activities, are they doing sufficient activities? Is everybody clear on that? Okay. So you get what you inspect. So if you want $100, you got to go look and see if they made $100. And you got to look at that and say, okay, I see 30 dials here where the time on the phone is a second or 2 seconds. You didn't make those dials, did you? Or you did, and then you hung up, and just so you could count a dial, right? That's called lying, and that's not acceptable. A true story, and this is not her fault, but we had a really good SDR, and we saw her performance. She was doing really good, and then her performance started tanking, and we started seeing this. She was dialing, but then hanging up and dialing. So there was all these dials, and we didn't know what. And she's like, "No, I'm making the calls. I'm making the calls, right?" And we're like, "Well, but the dialer, there's no call, right?" She ended up having a seizure. So she was having mini seizures and didn't know what she was doing. So I'm telling you, the numbers don't lie. But when you're tracking, what they say they're doing and what they're actually doing sometimes is completely disconnected. I have had reps sit there and say, I am a great listener. I listen to people. I'm a fantastic listener. And then you listen to a call with them and they're sitting there next to you, and you hear them talking over the prospect, missing cues. You're going, you're not a good listener. But they think they're a good listener. People have blind spots. And so you've got to track their numbers, their performance, because that ultimately tells you what's going on. Not what they think's going on, but what's actually going on.